Hi, my name's Doug. I've asked by a couple of my colleagues to show them how to replace a tenon cork on a clarinet, and I may get to doing a neck cork on a saxophone also. First thing you need to do is get sheet cork. Sheet cork comes in various sizes. You can get it from your music store. Their repair shop should be able to order some for you, or if you want to go online, you can get to Free Tools or Vota Tool or wherever you want to get sheet cork. I have 1/16 and then I have 1/8 ones. The 16th inch is going to be for clarinet tenon corks, and the thicker stuff will be for the saxophone tenon cork. You'll also need cork cement. This isn't rubber cement. Don't use rubber cement. Rubber cement is not something that's supposed to be used to hold things that are going to create some stress or even some twisting. It's more for paper. This is a contact cement. It's a put it on both sides, let it dry, put it together, it sticks, much like you would do laminate on a countertop or anything like that. I get all of my supplies, my cement and my cork, from my road rep. You'll need a straight edge razor blade, this one, or I've used the triangle ones, I've used old ones, I've used lots of that kind of stuff. You'll need mesh sanding screen. If you can see this, this is mesh sanding screen. It's got little holes in it. That's so the dust from the cork can come out. You can cut it to size based on how big your tenon corks are, and I'll show you how to use that later. You'll need a screwdriver to take off the keys of the clarinet, a mallet or a hammer, a ruler or a straight edge. Any kind of straight edge will be fine, and then maybe a pen or a pencil depending on how you want to mark your cork to get it done. Before we start doing any work, I want to remind you should never work on a rented instrument because voiding warranties are bad. So that's the first question I usually ask my kids is this a rental or do you own it? And they'll usually know, and if they say we own it, then you ask them, would you want me to fix it? And blah, blah, blah. The next thing, never work on an instrument unless you have enough money to fix your mistakes. So if you're working on something and you're taking a dent out, you're bending a key, if you break that, you have to have enough money to send it in and get it fixed on your dollar because that's your fault. I charge $3 to replace any kind of cork, tenon cork or neck cork. This is for my time and materials. The music store charges, $8 to $12. Just the sheet cork that I have here, it's a 12 by 4 inch piece of sheet cork. They sell that from anywhere to excuse me, from $12 to $18 for a piece of sheet cork. This piece of sheet cork will only do about 5 saxophone neck corks, maybe 6, depending on if you're doing all alto or tenor. And then the clarinet one will do a lot more. It'll do 13 or 14 tenon corks, depending on which ones you're doing, because some of them are thicker. Also, I guarantee my corks with my students for 6 months. So if they come to me and 3 months later and it's coming off, that's because I did a bad job and I'll replace it for free. I've had to replace one in my 14 or 15 years of teaching. So if you've got that all set out, then you're ready to go. The first step we have to do is remove the cork that has been broken. As you can see on this one in my other video, in the other screen here, we have a part that's just come off and we have the rest of the cork still on here. I don't take off the keys anymore, but what you should probably do your first few times is to take off these keys, and it's very simple. I'll show you how to do that real quick. I have my screwdriver. You're going to have to take off this screw, and this screw possibly to get these keys off. So I just unscrew it, and I have flat-nosed pliers. You can also, I have these in all of my band rooms. There's also this kind, and you can just go get one. But what you don't want something, this is ideal. These are the paddle duck bill is what they call them. And because when you're grabbing these screws, you don't want to put any marks in them because they have to be fluid in there so the keys can move. So I just pull that out like that. And I always put my key and my screw right next to each other. Just take a little bit of finesse because of the springs that are in here, and if you have trouble getting that spring out, just bring your screwdriver in and pop it out. Then we're almost clear of the cork, so we just need to take this key off, and this key is got a few more odds and ends to it that you have to deal with, because it's a post screw. It's not a through and through screw like these are. It's a post screw, so I usually don't unscrew them all the way. I just unscrew them until the key is free. And I just give it a little, well, this one's not playing nice. You probably need to come back here then and unscrew this, because this is a post screw. This screw goes all the way through to here, and you may just need a little bit of extra. Well, this one's being a booger. You get to see the exception. Congratulations. So you see how tiny that screw is. I don't really want to lose that. So after I put the key, I'll put this screw back in the post and give it a half turn, just so I don't have to worry about where it's going to be later on. Okay? So now that you've got your cork clear, what we're going to do is we're going to take off all of the extra cork material that was here. You can use your fingers. Some videos online will show you using pliers, and they just grab kind of close and it rips off the cork. Usually when you get corks, they're going to flake off just like that. Just got to use a little bit of elbow grease. If you don't have fingernails, you can use, I've used screwdrivers before, a flat blade screwdriver. So what you're going to find is when you get this completed, you'll have some little itty bitty marks on here of cork. You have to get those off. You can't put a new cork on if you have little bits of cork. So again, you're going to go through with the screwdriver scraping these until you have a clear palette, so to speak. Okay, so I've cleaned the Tenon cork of all the cork. It's got a little bit of glue. Usually when I'm working on a student model clarinet, I'm not so worried about just the little bit of cork or glue that we have on here. I've got most of it off. It is a little bit greasy, so a lot of times you'll take a rag or a paper towel or a piece of paper or your fingers, and you just get on there and make sure that that's a dry surface, because you don't want the grease and the cork cement to get messed up. I don't have that, so I'm going to use my shirt. So now I have a clean surface. At this point, you might find, I wanted to let you know that, say you're out at marching festival or you're out at contest, you're away from your repair kit. This is color guard tape. Don't use electrical tape for long periods of time because it has gumminess to it. But this is guard tape, the stuff that you wrap your guard poles and put your flags on with, and wrap your drumsticks with. It doesn't really gum up the mess, but you can take, if you're in a pinch, a lot of times you can take a piece of this and wrap it around part or all of the tenon, this part, whatever, and usually that will fit in here, and in a pinch the clarinet will work just like that if you're at a festival or something, until you can get back to your place and replace the cork yourself. And this just comes off and you can pitch it. So the next thing I like to do is I like to score. Now this is a Buffet E11, so it's a wooden clarinet, so you have to be careful when you do this, but with the plastic clarinets, a lot of times you'll take the cork off and this will be a smooth surface. And just like paint or any other thing, you want to have a rough surface to have the glue adhere to. So what I do is I just take the screwdriver and I just do contrary lines just all the way around and just to scratch it up. No big deal. And then I get the dust off, and now we have a good surface to glue. The reason I have this white paper here is because this isn't my desk and I don't like glue on my desk. So what we need to do is we need to measure our cork. As you'll notice, I have some hammers here. The reason that we have a hammer is because this cork is at most expanded point, and what we need to do is we need to compress it. What compressing does to the cork is it allows the cork to bend and flex better. It also expands the cork a bit, and that will eliminate if you accidentally shave or sand too much off of it. It makes it a lot easier. It's a lot more forgiving as we go. And really, I don't want to show you, this has already been hammered, but you just whack on it a bunch of times until you see it kind of expand, and you see this is kind of, it's kind of curved and it's wider at one end than it is on the other end, and you just hit it. It's really odd that you have to do that to the cork, but it is something that helps. And once it's on the clarinet, it'll do a little bit of expanding too, so you can always adjust better. The next thing you want to do is measure your cork. And this is really easy. You just use the clarinet or the saxophone that you're using, and I use a pen, and I just put it on the edge where it needs to be, and I mark it with my pen. A lot of videos, they'll take the razor blade and they'll mark it. No big deal. You can do that. Then I take it on the other side. And since I'm always working from a clean side that I've cut earlier on, let me double check that. It's no big deal. I just put it on here, take my pen, mark it. So that's where I go. And a lot of times, since the pen mark is thick, I will tell myself, okay, I'm going to cut on the outside or the inside of that pen mark when I make my cut. Then we have our sacrificial paper so our razor blade doesn't go through. And we take our two marks. I'm going on the outside of my marks right now. And if you're in doubt, go on the outside of your marks, because you can always take off more material. You can't put cork back on. Then I take my razor blade, and you don't need to cut all the way through. You just need to score it more than halfway through. So I just take my razor blade, keeping it up against the straight edge. And as you can see, it's still intact, but when I fold it, it comes off quite easily. So now I just double check my sizing. So I put it in there and I see, does it fit in all the way? Do I have a wide part? Did I mess up my cut? And as you can see, this one is just a little bit wide. So I might take my razor blade and just trim off a little bit of this edge. And that takes some skill, but just a skosh. So now I have something that fits into the groove. Now it's like this, and I need to bevel it by cutting it at an angle. So when I do my wrap, that the cork overlaps itself, so it's more sturdy, because you don't want the ends bumping up against each other, because then when you do the twist around it, it can catch, it can come up, and then you. So here, I'm going to take my, and this is what I do every time. I take my cork, I hang it slightly off, and I get a real steep angle. If you can see, I'm not on the table, I'm not straight up, I'm really steep though. And I just wiggle back and forth, keeping my finger on that side when I get to the end. Now as you can see, if you can, there's a bevel on that. It angles down, so when we wrap it around, it'll go around, and then we'll cut that off. I'll show you. Okay, so what we have now is we have our blank cork, we have our blank Clarinet Tenon, and what we need to do is put glue, contact cement, on it. Make sure that you put contact cement on the non-beveled side. So we want to turn this over, and we're just going to goop it up. It doesn't matter how much you put on. It needs to be an even coat, but don't worry about how much. I have my little cork here, cork cement. And I'm coming down, and since this end, the end opposite the bevel, isn't going to be used, I can hold there, and I start at my finger, and then get goopy with it. Just an even coat. Then when I put it on the clarinet, I'm a little more careful because I don't want to get the cement outside, but if you do, it just rubs off, as long as it's not touching other cork cement. Watch for your drips. And the brush should be about wide enough for the Tenon Cork groove. And you wait for it to dry. 2 or 3 or 4 minutes should be dry to the touch. While we're waiting for the cork to dry, I wanted to share some other tips for you. The first tip is a lighter. If you have a lighter or a source of flame, you can expand corks. If you have that clarinet that's a little wiggly at the middle joint, or the barrel doesn't quite fit, or the mouthpiece doesn't quite fit, if you take your lighter and you lightly heat the cork will expand. And usually it can expand enough that where it'll be a good temporary fix for your student or your instrument to fit together better. It's a really cool way to, oh, it's wiggly, okay. And sometimes it doesn't work, you have to end up doing the cork, but if it's got a good looking cork, that would be the first thing that I would try. The other thing that you can do, if you take a drop or two of valve oil and put it on a tenon cork or a saxophone cork that's dirty, and you take a rag and you clean off the cork really, because the oil will take all the dirt and all the grease away. It will, one, clean the cork, and two, the heat produced from the friction that you're doing will expand the cork. And a lot of times, like if you have a clarinet that's slipping apart, it's got too much grease on it, getting that grease off is important. That valve oil really, really helps. Okay, I've already turned off the camera and I've waited for it to dry. I've also added a second coat to the cork and to the tenon. I like a second coat, get it really dry. Somebody's calling on the phone. I like a second coat on the cork to make sure that I have it. So now, if you see that I have this cork, there's a little bit of glue on this side that's bled through, but we'll sand that off. Now, the next thing is you're going to wrap the cork most of the way around it. I never start at the bevel. I always start in the middle, and I always start in a way that when I'm sanding, and we're going to take these sanding strips and pull, and I'm right-handed, so I want the bevel to point this way, okay? So the bevel is going to be pointing this way, so when I pull, I'm pulling on a certain part of the cork, and you'll see about that later. And I always like to put the cork, or the seam, opposite these keys, because sometimes I don't take these keys off. So I'm going to put this right in the center, and once you put it there, it's there. It ain't coming off. So make sure, and then I'll wrap the bevel part around, and I've made it so it's in the wrong place. Good thing I took the keys off. Usually I'll put the center of it right here, and then it'll wrap and the bevel will be over here. So now you can see we have most of the way around, and we don't have any glue on this little bevel part, so we have to open up our can. And put a dab of glue on that bevel and wait for it to dry. Okay, so I've got the cork, I've waited for it to dry, and then I just continue wrapping the cork over the tenon, and we've got a nice fit. And you can see that we're going to need to cut that, so that's where our razor blade comes back in. And all I do is I just straight down. I always like to wiggle my, because this glue is a little bit tacky still, I wiggle my razor blade so I don't mess up the work I've already done. And as you can see, now we have almost a completed cork. There's a bump over here on the seam, and there's a little bump as we put the other body piece on. So that's where our sanding string comes in. The first place that I sand is over the seam, and the best place to do this is you just set the screen on there, use a little thumb pressure, and just pull it through. You don't even have to use a lot of thumb pressure, but you sand that down until it's smooth, and there's no bump, no awkwardness. And now we have a cork, and it looks really good, but there's a little catch when we put it on, because there's a little itty-bitty ridge right here. So we need to take that ridge off, and that's where our sanding screen comes in. And you can angle this screen, and you can adjust thumb pressure as you go. And I'm just going to take off a little bit of material on the front end of this cork with the sanding screen. I'm trying not to, on this one or any clarinet, to get into the material on here. This is wood, and the other one would be plastic if it's a student clarinet. I don't really want to get into that, so I'm putting a lot of pressure right on the edge, and I'm kind of twisting my cork. You'll get used to the sanding screen as you go. Now, we should have no lip on here, and it should, if you're using the right size cork, we should be able to put this right on, almost all the way dry fit. So that's the right size cork we have on here. We don't really need to do much else. If it's fitting almost halfway on dry fit, then you can go ahead and put your cork on, or your grease. You don't want to put grease on until you can get it really tight fit together, because once you put grease on there, you can't really sand off anymore. You have to take the grease off and then sand and all that stuff. It gets real messy and a pain in the butt. So make sure that you've got it almost dry fit. If it fits all the way on really easy dry fit, you got to start over. You've sanded too much, or you've used the wrong size cork. So hopefully if you're using the right size cork, it should come out perfectly. So I'm just going to take a little bit of this, and it doesn't take much, and I put a little on, and I always use my fingers to rub it in, and that way you can feel if there's a spot that's dry. And if there's a spot that's dry, then you can put some more cork on. And you're going to have too much grease on here the first time, but you clean it off later, and then we should just be able to put our clarinet together like that. Installing the keys is the same as taking them off, and you have a Tenon cork. I do remind my students after I replace one of their corks that I've greased it once, but they need to grease it a couple of times in the next week or two just to make sure that it doesn't get too dry. And after that, they're good to go. Thanks. Okay, I decided when I was putting this one back together that you might need this information. You might not. This is a spring hook. You can use a very small crochet hook. However, this has a hook on the front end and on the inside, so it doesn't just pull, it can actually push springs. When you're putting your clarinet back together, this one goes in here, but there's a spring in here that has to be on the back side. So once you get this on here, you have to figure out a way to get that spring back on one. And this one's really kind of tricky. You can't do it with your normal I've got a pen or my baton or whatever that you have. So I have my spring hook, and I find that spring, and I pull it, and I push it back, and we have it on. When I took this one off, I noticed that these springs are flat springs, and this spring was really loose. There's a screw right there, and all you do is you just tighten it down, and it should stay put. Then you put everything back on. So I'll just continue putting this on.